So today it's not going to be a really advanced how to support kind of live stream. Right now what I want to do is just kind of show how I support within Lychee, and mostly to show off a lot of these features that if you're new to Lychee, you may not understand. I'm going to use this model from TitanForge. It's a really simple model, and I chose it mostly just because the fact that it's not going to be too complex if we have any new users in here. And with that, let's get started. First thing when I get a model in Lychee, what I really want to focus on is model orientation, as well as making sure that it's lifted off the build plate. There's a few new features that we've added in here under Move, and one of them is this lift up. What's nice about this one is it actually has this auto lift, where every time you load a model in the scene, it can auto lift given the distance here. This is really nice because printing on the build plate can be a bit of an issue. I like doing 5mm because that leaves a little room for the raft and for some of the bottom exposure to kind of get clear of the actual model. Right now you can have this put back on the plate so you can see it's touching the build plate. That's the green right there. But if I just lift up, it's going to use that 5mm and lift it up to where I want to be. Now what I like to do is to get orientation, what I'm really looking for are V's. And V's because they're really easy to print. So like a V would be shaped like this one. So right now that sword is kind of poking out a little bit. We've got a bit of a V shape here, but it's a little bit lopsided. And so what I want to do is just kind of look at the model real quick and get an idea of what's the best way I can orientate this so I don't have to put supports everywhere. Example would be maybe a bad way is if it was down like this, I'd have to put maybe some supports on the nose or on the face. And this cute little model, I don't want to put supports on those sides. I really want to preserve the face because when I'm looking at it, that's kind of the thing you're going to focus on is this face, maybe the shield. And so if I use the box here and do click it from the front, and then using this gear icon, I can change it to orthographic. What's nice about this one, this is a two-dimensional view of a three-dimensional object. I like using this a lot from actually the bottom view. And this can really help kind of minimize how much space or what I'm looking at. So you can see something like this one, I'm looking at a lot of surface area to support. But from the bottom, I can kind of say, okay, where do I have the least amount of surface area, or where, am I not seeing the face that I don't really want to put supports over? So I can use this as a method to orientate. Or if I'm just wanting to make sure this sword is really easy to print, I can kind of, get a nice V shape right here between the face and the shield. This model's simple enough where this is a good way to orientate it. And then from that, we move on to basically supporting. For that one, we go to the Prepare tab and we click on Supports. And there's a couple methods to supporting. One, of course, is the auto method, which is where we'll just allow the model to, or allow the program to support itself based on the pre-support that I've selected. So here I clicked on medium, and it's going to put a bunch of medium supports on the model just kind of based on these settings. So the density and how far away I want to search for, which this is more if we have a really complex model with a lot of overhangs. I won't get into it today. It can get a little bit more complex. But what I really want to focus on is more of the manual supporting. And there's a couple workflows that can really make this simple. One of them is the island search. And there's a couple different settings within island. So fast one is, accidentally click search. Fast is where it's going to search for the largest layers. And if we can go to maybe more normal, we should get, we start seeing some of these layers, yeah. So we're seeing some of the smaller islands. Now, I guess what is an island for those who may not know? An island is any part of the object that's basically floating, like an island. So here we can see these are islands. There's at this point of the model, there's multiple models. And as you kind of keep going, you'll see maybe a few other model islands kind of pop up. So that's technically at this point, it's a separate model. And only until it connects later on is it now a part of the same model. So if we didn't put any supports on this right here, or we didn't put enough supports, this area would be flat. And same thing on these ones as well. If we didn't put enough supports along this cape, it wouldn't print properly, but if we put supports on the shoes, they would, which is where you can find where parts of your model print successfully and other parts don't. It usually just means that that section didn't have enough support. And so that island search is a good way to find out where some of these bigger islands are that probably require a bigger support. And I say bigger islands because I'm on a lower accuracy, meaning it's going to search for taller islands. So what I like to do now is go to a medium support. A model of this size, I don't really need to go to a heavy. It's a mini. I primarily use heavies for like larger objects, big statues, or terrain is where I'll use a couple heavies. So here for medium, this is where I like to come in and get these very bottom layers, the first ones that start to print, because they're going to have the most stress against them, because they're going to be supported through the entirety of the print. But also, if I can get these bottom layers really anchored down really well, it's really going to help the whole print succeed. So there's a couple ways to do this. One, we could just go through and just start clicking on all the red, but that can be, if you're experienced, that can be easy, but if you're new, that can maybe be a little confusing or challenging. So another trick is to grab the slider on the bottom, and we're just going to kind of go down, and we can look at individual parts at a time. And that way we're just looking at one thing. It's a lot easier to chew when you're just looking at one thing at a time. So from here, what I like to do is just kind of click on the very bottom. If you notice that there's this white cursor that goes over, and you'll see it's a ring and it eventually goes to a dot. The red's covering it up a little bit, but you can still hopefully see it underneath there if I zoom in. So that's where I'll put my very first support. That's the very first part of this entire model that's going to get printed. Now another thing I like to do is one support, though it may be enough for an area, it's risky, and I like to do what I need plus extra just in case something goes wrong or it fails or this support doesn't print properly. And anything that's a downward triangle like this, what I like to do is actually do 3 supports, kind of like that. That way I've got a lot of structure here, and it's not just about making sure it doesn't break off, it's also about making sure that it doesn't move side to side or flop around, because that's where you can start to get layer lines. And then I'll just kind of keep going up to these bigger supports and doing the same thing. You know, each of these bigger supports, I'm using these mediums right here. And this is on the very bottom of the model as well. So when it's all said and done, you're not really going to see any of the damage that these produce, being a slightly bigger at the 0.4 millimeter tip right here. And the tip being what actually makes contact with the model itself. The bigger the tip is, you know, the more damage it's going to create. You see, like that's a 1.3, it's massive. So we'll do a 0.4 and kind of go back to that one. So if we just kind of go through and click on these real quick, I'll just do that real fast because it's basically just rinse, repeat at this point. Find the different islands, do 3 supports really. And this is not a workflow you have to copy exact, right? This isn't, doctrine or anything like that. It's just kind of what I like to do. And also to based on the size of the island. This island right here is stays an island, but it's not as big, as like maybe this one right here. It's relatively small and it connects, about right there. So it really doesn't go on for very far. Another thing that's kind of nice, what you could try to do is hide that support damage. So if we're looking at the model right here, we're really not going to see the back of this cape, but if you were looking at the back of the model, you'll see the back of it, but underneath here, you really won't. So if you sneak a support, in this area or the back of this cape up here, they're going to be so hard to see using these bigger ones. It's not really going to be an issue. And that's where you can get away with maybe doing a little bit larger support tip down here, just to add a little bit more support, a little higher success rate. Same thing on the shield right here, on the hair, coupled on there, the ear. But sorry, let's do it where I'm actually looking at islands one at a time. See, there's a nice little island right there. Kind of goes up pretty big, and kind of difficult to get in there. Shapes like this, they can be a little challenging on how to do, because what do? Do you do like a mini support in here where you connect to both the cape and the bottom, or do you try to find a place where you can put a support all the way down to the base? Whereas anytime you have to put a support that goes from the bottom of the model onto the cape, you've now added 2 points of damage instead of just 1, which of course isn't ideal. So what we'll want to do is try to find a way to avoid that in general. So one way to do that one is to kind of move it around until it snaps. And then if you're using Lychee Pro, you can hit space and you can edit these individually. And it's kind of nice because you can just kind of either move the triangles to move them in 1 dimension at a time, or you can click on these squares right here to move them in 2 dimensions. And that can be really helpful if you just kind of want to slide things around. If you don't have Pro, what you can do is just kind of grab the tip right here and kind of move it around, and then grab the base and move it around independently. And you're just kind of trying to find a spot where it's not red. because of course where it's red, it's either too close or it's intersecting the model. And you might have an issue where when you print it, that support fuses to the model, something like this, and you end up having this, you know, really ugly point right here you just can't get off, and that model could be ruined. If you also have Pro, there's a proximity detection you can run. I always recommend when you're finished to come over here and click this. It'll run real quick. That will detect everything just to make sure there's no proximities or anything going through your model, and then you can continue. So this one right here is a little bit more difficult. We can kind of squeeze in there. And we might be able to do it. Might be able to squeeze in there with it. Yeah, it's a little bit dangerous right here. When your supports are really vertical, or they're kind of parallel to the build plate, they're not working as well. And again, this is where having Pro can be really good, because you can come in here and grab this orb and just kind of move it down, or you know, move that out and kind of change these around a little bit, just to get a slightly better angle. So we're no longer going down straight over and down, because that point where it's going straight is really going to want to move like this, and that support is going to lose some of its strength. Once you kind of have your base structure, we'll kind of go up and just do the rest real quick. I just grab some of these bigger islands. It's nice because it just tells us where they're at, because of that island search. It's why it's a relatively beginner-friendly workflow, because you can just kind of come in here and just kind of click real quick on where these go. And once you get these islands, we can, oh, there's one right there. I kind of want to get one there, and maybe sneak one in there. No, okay. So now what we can do is come in here and do another island search, where we can increase the accuracy, and we'll get more islands each time. If you have Pro, you can get the real island search. This one's unique from the others because this one's actually using your resin profile on how it searches. And what I mean by that one is, if you pull up your resin profile, you've got the layer thickness right here. So it uses this number to do an island search. So the higher that number, let's say if it was 1, it's going to do really big islands. It's looking for any island that's that size. But if I do, 0.01 or 0.001, it's going to start searching for some really tiny islands. It's going to take a long time to run, so we won't run anything like that one. But you can actually control the detail of that one using your layer thickness. So for now, we'll just do 0.03. We'll do a pretty detailed island search. And then we will click on, we'll do a search on that one. All right, so now I've got this detailed island search. Looks like this one just doesn't have too many islands. I believe I found a couple extra when I did this before in testing. It's a really simple model that I chose, so there's just not very many islands on it in general. All right, well, I guess that's fine for a simple model like this one, but let's just go through and do a double check just to make sure, and then we'll move on to doing some more bracing and parenting. Because right now, if we printed this one, I think we would get a lot of failures. Where we'd get a lot of failures would be in this arm right here. And that's because trying to print all this right here with just one support and the arm, it may work given the angle, but there's a high chance that we'll get some layered lines in here, or if anything in this arm fails because there's just not enough structural support behind it. I've just through experience, it's looking a little bit risky. And same thing with this shield right here. Some of that's going to be experience, just kind of looking at how much weight you're trying to support with the type of, how much weight are you trying to print with the amount of supports that you have. And also, I guess let's do this real quick. This might be a better way to explain it. Let's bring in a nice cube. And there's some really cool prints as well that follow the same test by Denny's Wing, where he's created some calibration prints that look kind of like this. And the idea is something where if you're trying to print, let's say a big wing, and let's say you've got a bunch of supports like this, but right now this is a big wing, and if I'm trying to print this, it's going to kind of flip left and right, and we're going to get some layer lines as this thing's trying to print, because we just, even if this is enough prints to actually make it work, it's not enough to keep it from rotating or shifting during the print. a big object like that, it's easy to tell this wouldn't work. And so, you know, something like this one, to make it work, you could come in here and place some supports on the side like this. And that could help stabilize it a little bit more and get less shifting. But that same thing will happen on something like this sword. So what you want to do is move to a smaller support type. So now I'm done with my medium right now. I've got enough in here to really keep this model grounded. And I'm going to go to light, and I'm going to start filling in the details. And I'm going to start making sure that not only is there enough support to keep this thing printing, but there's enough support to keep it from shifting or rotating, or some of these smaller details from flattening out. And the big thing I'm going to see right now is this hand. And that's where I can come in here and, you know, use those same white lines. We got maybe a little island here, a little one there, and I can just kind of come in here and fill those in. Same thing on this sword. I'm really worried about the sword getting a few layer lines on it. So if I want to, I can come in here and try to do just a couple supports like that, just to give it a little bit more stability. There's another fun little thing in here we can use, and it's if you hold down Shift. So if I click down one support and hold down Shift, and that's under the manual interval, and you can adjust this number right here. So the lower this number is, the more supports I will put by 0.5. So just by holding down Shift, it'll put down every 0.5 millimeters based on the one that's selected at the time. So I have this one selected, and it'll go off that one. And you can just kind of keep doing that like that. Of course, that's too many supports for that little area. So I'll bring it back up to like maybe 2 millimeters. Place one support and then hold down Shift, and that's not even quite 2 millimeters right there. So another thing that I like to do, I would like to put one more support there, and I could just click and do that. But what I really want to do is I want to maybe save a little bit of resin. So instead, if I hold down left Alt on my keyboard, click where I want the tip to go, that gives me the ability to control where I want the base to go. And I can put that base wherever I want. You can, if you attach it to another part of the model or another support. On this one, I'm going to attach it to another support. Now, this is what we call parenting, but there's another thing you can do while holding down Alt. And if I don't click on the model, but instead I click on another support, and then click on another support again, this creates what's called a bracing. And there's a little bit unique about a bracing and another type of support within Lychee Slicer. And a bracing only has two different dots, and each dot can be, they'll kind of scale, you can scale them independently, but there's only two, where a normal support is where there's multiples. And that's where you can, if you have Pro again, you can see how this works, and you can manipulate them, scale them independently, where bracing only has the two. And again, the difference is a support makes contact with the model and the build plate, or another support, where bracing makes only contact with other supports. And that's the difference there. And again, parenting is one that makes contact with the model and then another support. And then, well, I guess we can talk about this real quick. So the way I like to use phrasing is I call this the support shaft, and that's anything from this ball, which is where the cone of the actual support tip is basically finished, the beginning of the support tip cone, all the way down to the base of the support. I call that the support shaft. And then from this ball right here to this ball, I call that the tip. But in reality, the tip is really only the point that actually makes contact with the model. And scaling this, doesn't really scale that. But this is the length of the tip right here, and this is the actual tip. So when we're adjusting the tip diameter, or if I'm asking, hey, what is the size of your tip or anything like that for the supports, what I'm really asking isn't the size of this, but the size of this, the actual part that makes contact with the model. Because that's the one that's going to leave the damage. If it's too big or if it's too small, it's not going to be able to hold enough weight, and the model, even if you have tons and tons of supports, if they're just too small, it's not going to print successfully, and you're going to have a failure. All right. So with that one, we can kind of keep going, and we can do some of that parenting and bracing. So make sure we're using a nice smaller support tip here. And we can just basically, you can do stuff like this where I'm just holding down Alt to quickly create that parenting. And that's just mostly about saving resin. We got the same thing here, right? We've got these 4 support shafts here. We may not need them all. So if we want to, I could delete this guy, come in here and hold down, again, Alt on my keyboard, click, click, and then do it again, click, click. And now I've reduced the amount of resin that I'm using. And in some cases, this can actually gain more success because I have almost built-in bracing along with supporting, because instead of just having these individual shafts that can themselves wiggle around, it adds a little extra structure. There's another thing we can do, which is kind of fun, which is a way to work with these miniature supports. So you see how if I hold here, I get these little mini ones. Mini ones are a lot like bracings, where they only have 2 sides on them, and but they're kind of fun. And where what we can do is, if we hold down Control and Alt on our keyboard, we can click and then we can control where they're going to go. So if I, let's say, put one there, and now this one's selected, and I hold Shift and Alt, I'll actually make a copy of whatever's selected. So right now what's selected is this mini. So holding down Shift and Alt on my keyboard, I can come here and I can keep placing down more mini supports. And this is a good way to sneak into these overhangs we had before and make sure that I've got enough structure. So we had some issues here where I can place one of them, but instead of coming here and placing lots of them, which are going to create a lot of extra damage right here, that would kind of fuse together and just become this really gross, nasty looking part that would be hard to remove and leave a lot of damage. Instead, what I can do is click on this one, so it's highlighted, hit Shift and Alt, and then do this. And what that does, it actually shares the same base. So it's much smaller damage on the model. It's gonna be much easier to remove, but I am getting more spread out kind of structure. So the chance of this failing and going flat is much, much lower. The other part to kind of consider is this is more oblong against the model here. So I may want to come in, just kind of grab it and drag it just a little bit so it's a little bit more round. And by oblong, what I mean, let me artificially kind of create something really bad. Maybe something like this one, where we really have this really big amount of contact with the model. And that's, you're never going to be able to get that off. It's just, you know, even if you break this part off, you're going to have this big lump here. So that's what I mean by oblong against the model. We really want to try to make sure that when we're placing a support, they're 90 degrees off of the surface. So that's pretty close to 90 degrees. That one's not. So we could do on that one the same thing we did before. Holding down the Control and Alt, it will automatically create a mini support right here. Or you can also check it, and it will convert a regular support to mini just by clicking this checkbox. And then again, holding down the Shift and Alt on my keyboard, it will repeat this, and I can just kind of go through and create another one. Next thing you can do is you can grab these. If you have Pro, again, you can hit spacebar to pull up advanced editing mode. Grab these orbs right here, and you can actually kind of move them around if you want to change the angle of these minis, or grow them if you want them to have a little more structure while they come out. This can help you kind of change the angle in which it comes off the model, is by adjusting how this connects. It's one of the many advantages of having Lychee Pro, is being able to go in there and do that. All right, let's see what else got going on here. Right here, let's see this let's kind of scroll down here and see when this attaches to the model, how big of a island this is right here. That's what we're really worried about. Another thing is, if you hit wherever your cursor is on your screen, if you hit F on your keyboard, it will center to your cursor. So if I want to focus on this support right here, if I hover over it and I hit F, my camera will focus on it automatically. And then as I pan around, that's the focus of my screen. And that makes moving around a lot easier within Lychee. So F on your keyboard is very valuable. I use it all the time. So right here, let's keep moving this up until it connects. So it's about right. Also, if you hit up on your keyboard, the up arrow, you do one layer at a time, or down one layer at a time. It can be helpful if you're trying to find like when something just barely connects. So right here, that's that's small enough it doesn't really matter, but that's where we're at. So this is what we need to support. And I think the problem right here is this overhangs maybe a little bit too much. It could be okay, but I don't trust it. So this is where I might come in with like a light or even an ultra light, because all I really want to do is maybe give it just a little bit more structural integrity until it connects with the model and has another point of contact and really starts to get strong. So I'll come in here and add just a little bit more. And if I really want to come in here and add maybe like a couple more supports like this one. I've seen some people do this and others not, because these little tiny ones can be sometimes a little bit difficult to remove. But especially as you're new and you're not really comfortable with how much support you need or don't need, I'd say this is a really good method to maybe over support a little bit while not increasing the amount of damage you're going to have on your model. As you get more comfortable where to put supports and where to hide them, you know, maybe eventually you won't need to use that tactic anymore, but definitely for starting out, it can be very, very helpful, especially if you come in here and kind of make these a little bit wider. And you don't have to do that using the hitting spacebar and hitting that one. You can actually just come in here into the side right here and manually type those in and make those fatter on that side. And that's also going to make it so it's easier to remove from the model. When it's just a straight, let's do that, and then make it a mini. Sorry. When it's a straight shaft like this, sometimes it doesn't break off from the model, and you end up with these little kind of hairs all over the place, and it takes a while to clean them up. And so coming in here and shrinking, growing that backside, or manually doing it here, can be really beneficial to where they actually separate from the model cleanly and really reduce your post-processing time. Real quick now, let's go over bracing. Bracing is very, very important because the resin that's being used to make your supports, it's not any different resin that's being used to make your model. So if your model won't print because it's too tall, or there's not enough bracing, the supports won't either. And this right here is a really good example of that, where this is really tall and really skinny. And if this was trying to print, it would just kind of flop around quite a bit. And we don't want that. We want it to be nice and structurally sound. You want your supports to print without the model for the most part. So the point of the model isn't to print the supports. The point of the supports is to print the model. So there's a couple ways to do that. One thing, you can just left click and drag and grab the models you want to add bracings to, and then just hit bracing, and that will automatically add them. Next thing you could do is, let's say I just want to brace these two right here. Just select the two by holding down left shift on your keyboard, hit bracings, and that will put bracings to the two and kind of intersect all the other ones. Or you can manually do it just by holding down Alt on your keyboard and come in here and just kind of click, 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 click on how you want the bracings to go. This is, it's the way you want to do it. There's pros and cons to each one. It's kind of a resin consumption versus strength conversation that I won't get too detailed in here, but that's kind of some of the reasons on the different methods. But the quick and easy way is just to select it all and hit bracings, and you're good to go. And as far as bracings, I don't like to brace anything that's shorter than 20 millimeters. And to give an example of what that looks like, open up the library, pull up a cube here, and right now it's set to 10. So just set it to 20 to get a good idea how tall that is. And then we'll just put it right on the build plate. There's a fun little tool I like, which is on the plate, and you just, wherever you click, it's going to put that surface on the build plate. If you haven't used that tool before, it's pretty awesome. And then of course Move has some of the same stuff where it has on the plate as well, or lift up. I kind of talked about that earlier. Of course, yeah. So anyway, there's your 20 millimeters right there. I've found that if your support is really taller than that one, you really should support it, or you should brace it. Shorter than this, it's not really necessary, but if you're worried about it, go anyway. 15, if you're really, really worried about it, is really about as tall as you need to go. Anything that's taller than 15, or really that's shorter than 15, really doesn't need bracing. It's going to print just fine. But if, especially if you're doing parenting on top of it, it's really not going to be an issue. But if you are worried about it all, little ones like this one, I would just come in here and click on and hit bracing, and then you're good to go. These little ones right here, they really don't need it. But if you want to, a quick way to do it is if you hold down Alt, and it pulls up this nice fun little snap where it snaps to the support and to the build plate. If you just double click, it's going to quickly add that. And now that support is braced. Like I said, not necessary for a support that small, but if you're better safe than sorry kind of methodology, that's a quick and easy way to add a quick bracing. All right, so now that we've got our model supported, let's add a raft to it. So in that one, we can click on raft, and we've got all these raft options. Not all these options are available with free, but the best ones is available with free, and that's just the shape wall is my favorite for models like this one. I like it a lot because this little wall right here, it allows a scraper to get underneath it and just pop it off the build plate. The next one I really like a lot is the line triangle. This uses a little bit less resin. I mean, we're very little resin between the two differences. But what I like about this one, especially for very large models, is these triangles underneath it. can allow a little bit of air through and IPA through and make cleaning a little bit easier. And it does use a little bit less resin if you're doing like a really, really large base or something like that one. But for a model of this size, this is a fantastic raft. You're gonna love it. Hollowing, we'll go over that really, really quickly. It's maybe a little bit advanced for this course, but there might be someone here who would really like to know about hollowing. For that one, we're just gonna use a simple cube. We'll scale it up nice and big so we can get an idea of kind of hollowing. Since this model is really too small to hollow, it wouldn't do us any good. So the hollowing that I like to do is the 3D hollowing. 2D hollowing, if you only have the free version, will work, but it's not as, you don't have the same amount of freedom as you have with 3D. So with this one, the thickness here is the thickness of the wall, and I'll show you what that looks like. So that's the thickness of this wall right here. If I make it nice and thick, you'll see the wall is pretty thick. If I make it small, too small, the walls might be too thin and they'll fail. So what I've noticed is about 1.8 is a really good thickness for this one. And the quality is how many polygons are on the inside. So if I crank that up, I'm gonna have more polygons on the inside. Of course, a square is not the best for that. But where that can be helpful is, let's say you have a really complex shape and you want the hollowing to be a little more accurate, so we can open up, let's say, a leg that gets really thin. Well, we can try it on this guy real quick. On the quality. So if we increase the quality, there's going to be more polygons, which will take longer. But as you can see, we actually got more hollowing out of the model than we did on a really low polygon count. We're actually going to use a little bit less resin. So it's really kind of play around with it. But I found about 2 to be a really good trade between the complexity of the hollowing and how much resin you're going to save. Once you're done with hollowing, there's this really cool thing called suction cup detector, which will look in through your model and find suction cups. Suction cups are failures I see all the time. And I think mostly because new users aren't aware that that's an issue, or that something like this would create so much force it will rip the model in half, or just put so much force on your printer it can even damage it or reduce the lifespan of the FEP. And so this cool little suction cup detector shows me exactly the suction cup and the shape. To get rid of it, you just have to use a hole. And the hole is just going to basically put a punch in the model. And again, this model is maybe not the best for this, but we can go ahead and shove one in there and kind of open it up. And you'll see if I do another search on the suction cup, it's going to mostly get rid of that. The reason for that being is now there's a spot for air and resin to get inside the model while it's printing. And there's a really cool view here that lets you see the interior and exterior. So we can actually come in here and look at that. You can also see that's not the best. And if we open up like that, we'll have a better hole inside this model. Because anywhere this is black is not going to, there's going to be no resin when we slice it and print it. It's just going to be a hole from the outside the model to the inside the model. And that's a really cool view for going in there and kind of checking and seeing what's going on. Some of you might have saw there's a few suction cups still in there. I'm not seeing them right now. There were a few in here earlier, but they're so small at that point, these little tiny ones, it's no longer an issue. At that point, this will print, even with that hole there, and we're gonna have, it's gonna reduce some resin, and it's gonna reduce the cross section. Because you can see right here, the only peel force is gonna be what's white. Where if we delete that hollowing, the peel force is now everything that's white here. So you can see it's a lot more peel force to rip it off the FEP, which will put more stress on the supports. And of course it's gonna be more weight, which will put some more supports on the stress as well. That's why hollowing is really important, because not only does it actually increases the quality of your print, because the less weight, the less it will kind of pull on itself, and the less supports that you need, because the less weight and less peel force. So not only does it make your prints look better, and it dramatically increases your success rate, it also dramatically decreases the resin consumption. All right, we'll move over to export. This is where we can cover anti-aliasing and kind of the last steps of your model for printing. First thing, it's important if you don't have a printer, you have to add one. I've got a lot of printers in mind. Adding a printer is pretty easy. Just click on add. You'll select resin. You'll find the printer you have, or if you can just do a quick search in here and find all the printers that you maybe want to add. So let's say I've got the X2. Once you've added a printer, you want to add a resin. click on Add Resin Profile. What I like to do in this one is actually to just make a copy of the default, and then change the brand. What brand of resin am I using? And then I'll start editing the settings here. The reason why I do this one is you don't want to use the default because this can get overwritten. It's always good to add in your resin by brand and by the color, and then edit this one. That way your resin settings will kind of be yours. There's no chance of it getting overwritten. And also, as you add more and more resins, it's good to keep them separate, because in resin printing, what works for one resin will almost never work for another resin. They're always going to be a little bit different, and calibration is always needed. But once you get that dialed in, we'll go over to, so right here you can see we've got our printer, we've got our resin, and now anti-aliasing. So with anti-aliasing, there's quite a few options in here. The one that, with all the testing I've done, the one that I've seen that really works the best is the smooth surfaces with a radius of about 2 pixels, and then the gray offset between 0 and 10%. The more left you get, the higher, the more anti-aliasing you get, but some of the details can get a little bit soft. However, in testing between basically 10 and 20, I'm seeing very, very little detail loss, to a point where I think it's worth it going all the way down to 0, because some of the stepping you get in layer lines can look more unpleasant than a slight softening of some of the details by going all the way down to 0. The next thing is having high definition anti-aliasing on. The difference between this is kind of like an old anti-aliasing code that Lychee used a while ago that didn't work quite as well, but also took a lot less system resources. The reason why we still have this in here is because, especially if you're using one of these new printers that's 12K or 8K, having a high definition anti-aliasing with those 12K printers, it can be pretty taxing on your system. And we've seen some where printers will crash or they'll run out of memory. And so if that's happening when you're slicing, or it's just taking a really, really long time, a couple things you could try is just turning this off, or reducing the complexity of the scene. Having less models in there can help. Also, make sure that you don't have a bunch of other applications running. We've all heard Chrome takes a lot of RAM, so making sure you don't have any web apps or anything like that running before you do your slice can help out a lot for getting a good clean slice. So we'll turn that on, and the next thing is, really mostly that's it. At that point, we'll just hit export the slice to file, and that will access where we want to save it. We'll save it, and then it will start slicing. Once it's done, at that point, you'll just copy it onto a USB device and put it in your printer and print. If you're using a printer, let's say like the Saturn III Ultra, you can actually choose the option to send it wirelessly to your printer and print it. Of course, this is very contingent on the wireless connection between the printer and your access point, not between your computer and the access point, but the printer itself. So if they're far away and they don't have the best connectivity, this might take a long time, or it might fail. So one thing to keep in mind, make sure that you've got a good connectivity before you send that, especially if you've got a really large scene that's quite large, like gigabytes large. It can take a long time to send that wirelessly from your computer to the access point, and then from the access point to your 3D printer. In those cases, it might be best to just use the USB method, and instead of sending wirelessly, just the way we've always done it. I know, well, here, real quick, one thing I didn't show off that's really, really fun that I like quite a bit. Pretend this is a really pretty base. It's not, but we'll pretend it is. And it's the projection support. I love it. Hopefully everyone's aware of it by now, but if you're not, it's found under supports and auto. It is a pro feature, but it's so worth it. And then start projection supports. So right here, you've got these different ways of selecting the polygons. My favorite is just the center one. You click on the surface you want to support. It's gonna kind of automatically select it based on the geometry. And then we're gonna click on preview supports. That's gonna give us this cool little preview. Every dot is where support's gonna go, and we can change those dots. So for example, border is the border of the object right here. And so the offset right here, this is probably the one I get the most questions on, is the offset is how far away from that border is this, from the physical border, is the border of supports going to start. So as you can see, as I move that around, you'll see how that kind of goes closer or not. And what I like to do is bring it up right close to the border. So let's say 0.3. That gets me right up close to it. And then the the interval is how many millimeters is each support going to be on the border. So of course, as I bring that up, they get further away. As I bring that down, they get really close. Here, I like 2 millimeters, so let's do 2, every 2. And that's mostly all I like to change on this one. The the presets is labeling when they're done, but, the presets. This gets we're picking which type of supports we want to apply from our presets. The labeling is the tag, but I won't get into that one. This is just a real quick demo. Double border, if we want to have 2 borders or 1, and of course the infill. Infill is the infill. And on this one, we get to choose whether we want a grid, some really kind of fun patterns, random. My favorite for something like this one would be a grid. And same thing, the offset here is between the border and itself. So you'll see it offsets where the actual infill starts. So same, about that's fine. And then of course the infill is how many supports there are. So the lower it is, the more supports, the higher it is, the less. And here about 4 is what I like. And then click on add supports. So it's gonna add 230 supports, and that's pretty much it. We have now supported a base. I may have lifted up a little high, but. And the next thing is, what I like to do is I'll go to the top and I'll select just the supports that I think are kind of tall. Maybe, what I talked about earlier, taller supports are the ones that need to be braced. So we'll grab, let's say, that's about that 20 millimeter. And then click on manual and click on bracing. Now only the tallest ones are braced, not these smaller ones over here that don't need it. And we're done. We've basically supported a raft. And once you've got your settings dialed in, to kind of give you an example, this can be really, really quick. Because you come over here to your start supports projection, click on preview, and then click on add. And I kind of keep the settings the same. I don't really have to change them from this one. So that's how long it takes to support a base, is just those few clicks. Something I really love. Oh, why tilt the base? Yeah, that's a really good thing. Good question. If you don't tilt the base, let's say it's flat like this one, what we're gonna end up with is, I'll show you another trick here. See how these are all kind of gross because I moved it? Right click on it and hit recalculate supports, and they go back to the way they should be. Kind of fun little thing right there. But if I print it flat like this, what's going to happen is I'm gonna have a lot of pill force. Pill force again is how much each layer has to separate. It's really big, as big as it can get. If I tilt it, I'm gonna get way less pill force per layer, but that's not the only reason. The other reason is, it's called cross curing. And that is, if you really think about it, when this is being printed, there's a light source right here, and it's actually shooting down into the model from the top where the light source is down into it. And right here, where it's really, really thin, the light is going to penetrate. And if I have resin stuck right here, it's going to kind of cure a little bit, and you're gonna get some pillowing. With an angle like this, the resin's gonna flow off a little bit more, and you're gonna have less cross curing. When it's flat like this, you're gonna have, the resin's kind of gonna get stuck. It's not gonna flow off really well. And with how big this area is, there's gonna be a lot of light coming through and a lot of light bleed. It's gonna cause a lot of cross curing, and you're actually gonna have where you'll see this pillowing effect and kind of a really gross and dirty underside. Now this is true with any overhang. It's as that light kind of pierces through several layers and cures the layer underneath. A transparent resin cross cures worse than a really opaque resin, or if you're printing at low layer heights, let's say like 30 microns versus 50, you're gonna get more cross curing. And some resins, that's kind of why printing under 30 is not recommended, and why some resins printing under 50 is not recommended, because they cross cure so easily. Hope that answers that question. And then, is there a way to change the thickness of support based on where they are being added? Yes, on that one. Let's go back to that. Let's delete all these supports and go back to my projection and preview. So on the infill, I can choose the support preset based on the infill or based on the border. You actually have three choices here. Or if you're under global, the global is kind of like the easy. You don't have as much settings where you can kind of just change what support type you want. But this one's it's global, so it's gonna do everything. But this is where these other two tabs come into play, where there's a lot more options in here. It can be a little intimidating, but this is where you can really change how you want those different support presets to be used based on where they're attaching to the model. All right, and I think that's it for now. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. We're gonna post this up later on, maybe after some editing. And if you couldn't miss it, couldn't catch it today, or couldn't catch the whole thing, come back and watch it later.